Hi, in this video I'll be reviewing Alexander Jablokov's 1994 collection called The Breath of Suspension. My copy is a mass market paperback published in 1996. Alexander Jablokov was born in Chicago in the 1950s. He's published over 50 short stories and 6 novels since 1985. The Breath of Suspension is a collection of 10 short stories that were originally published in Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine between 1985 and 1992. Being over 30 years old, this collection may be hard to find unless you have a good used bookstore near you. A quick eBay search found several used copies for reasonable prices, though. Also, the Internet Archive has the Asimov's issues that each story was originally published in, and this was lucky for me, and I'll explain why near the end of the video. Now to the reviews. The first story is called The Breath of Suspension. It clocks in at 57 pages, which I think puts it in the novelette range. It follows a man named Vikram Austin who comes from a wealthy family. To comply with family tradition, he's been assigned to work at the monastery of St. Thecla in Michigan for a while. While he's there, he assists a girl named Lorena who has her foot caught in some driftwood that is piled up in the lake. He also meets a deformed woman named Aya Ngomo who takes a liking to him but is also driven to find some piece of herself that she believes is missing. The story is told in 2 interwoven parts. In one, it's 2182, and Vikram is telling Thomas, who I think is another priest, the tale of how he knows Saint Aya Ngomo. The tale he tells starts in 2121 and is his version of events that happened at St. Thecla's, the desert of Utah, an asteroid belt, and in Canada. I'd call this story an interesting slow burn. The theme seems to be what people are willing to give up for what they think is their calling in life. I think that's what the title is referring to, suspending the breath of life, i.e. what you really want, for something else. One character is willing to give up some independence for security, another's willing to give up their life to find what they're looking for, a third has given up his own happiness just to serve God. Though he's been successful, Vikram wonders about the opportunities he's passed up to do other things. Would they have led to more riches, a more valuable life, a better legacy? He wonders while examining the result of one of the things he passed up on. I think Jablokov does a nice job working information about the characters into the narrative. You get to know them slowly through Vikram's point of view, so nothing comes directly from any other perspective. I did think this made the other characters feel like side characters more than they needed to be, though. I think they had some depth, but it wasn't really explored enough since the narrative was focused on Vikram's desires and reactions. With that said, I do like a limited number of point of views in a short story, novelette, or novella, so it wasn't a big deal here. I liked the writing style in this story and would rate it a 7 out of 10. The second story is called Living Will. A man named Roman Maitland is training a computer by telling it about himself and his memories. A couple clues in the beginning tell you what is really going on before the situation is plainly stated in the third scene while Roman is talking to one of his friends named Gerald. In short, the main character is training an artificial intelligence. This may seem like a so what story given today's AI explosion. However, this story was originally published in 1991. The internet as we know it was still taking baby steps before becoming the world-altering beast that it is today. Though Roman comes across gruff at times, there's good reason for this. There's a lot of grief here, there's a lot of anger here, and despite Roman's unwillingness to burden those around him, there's collateral damage here from his actions and his attitudes, and he's powerless to stop it. I can't say much more than that, or it'll spoil the story for anyone that tracks down a copy of it to read. Jablokov shows some good character work in this 22-page story, which can be read in an hour or less, depending on your reading speed. Considering when it was written and the AI prognosticating it did, I would rate this one an 8 out of 10. The next story in the collection is a detective story called Many Mansions. The main bit of background to know about this story is that hyperdimensional worms have created literal wormholes in space-time. This allows for time travel from certain places and times to other places and times if one knows how the wormholes connect to each other. The story revolves around a detective named Matthias who works for an alien named Marienbad. Marienbad has learned of another alien that's addicted to religious revelation and is using time travel to feed his addiction. Matthias has to track him down before he does any damage. I enjoyed the story a lot. It starts off in ancient Rome, then takes the reader to multiple places: a frozen lake in prehistoric North America, medieval France, ancient Egypt, 1600s Persia, and finally the central highlands of Ceylon in the year 810. As is often the case with detective stories, this is told in the first person. I liked the main character, Matthias. He seems put off by the inconveniences he has to deal with during the search. He's a bit snarky in his descriptions and with his boss, but also seems to know he has a noble purpose. The bad guys don't really get too much focus, but one of them does get what he deserves in the end. Also, similar to other detective fiction, there's a little more going on here than a rampant alien with a weird addiction. I usually enjoy time travel stories a lot, and this one was no different. I would have actually liked to see more exploration of each time period, but you can't ask for too much in a story under 40 pages. I'm going to rate this one a 7 out of 10. Next up is a story called The Death Artist. About 28 pages of its 36-page length are a bit confusing as Jablokov slowly plays out information and made some odd scene shifts. It wasn't always totally clear to me what was just happening. In this far future, the incarnate are the lords of the world. They play a game where they temporarily transfer their consciousness to clones, then put themselves in dangerous situation. There's no real danger to them because their actual bodies, are safely tucked away in a sarcophagus-like container which maintains them. Other incarnates watch the situations play out, and those situations often end in death. If the death is impressive enough, if the struggle for life is entertaining enough, a form of social credit is awarded to the performer. This makes the death an art form, hence the title, The Death Artist. Elam is one such incarnate. When his clones die, he has a brief moment of consciousness in his sarcophagus, which isn't supposed to happen. This convinces him that someone's trying to kill him for real, and he has to find out who. I see several themes in this story. One is that those with near boundless power and resources will come up with some crazy ways to spend their time. These powerful people in this story are entertained by something extreme, watching the death of other people. Another theme is the ignorance of the rich and the powerful. The incarnate don't even understand the technology that allows them to play this game. They have others called the bound that actually maintain the technology and run it for them. Another theme in play is sibling rivalry. I can't really say too much about this one without spoiling things, so I won't go any further with that. I didn't enjoy the story as much as the first three in the collection. I'm okay with not knowing exactly what's happening in a science fiction story. Sometimes half the fun is finding out what's really going on. However, I thought this story took too long to make it clear what was really happening. The resolution was interesting and had a little twist that I kind of saw coming because I've seen it in other stories that were written both before and after this one was published. Overall, I liked the story, but some of the odd scene shifts were jarring and reduced my enjoyment. It's a good story, but sort of middle of the road for me. I'm rating this one a 6 out of 10. The next story sounds like it's taking us to a party and is called At the Cross Time Jaunters Ball. A guy named Jacob Landstatter is a critic. What he passes judgment on are creations that are complete worlds in themselves. When he decides there is sufficient beauty or artistic value to the world he's evaluating, he tells his client, who is a lord. The lords can buy the worlds and observe them at will, and it's kind of a sense of pride for them to have something that a critic really liked. Every piece of art has an artist, and some artists don't appreciate critical opinions. When someone tries to have Jacob killed in one of these worlds, he has to figure out if it's an artist or a lord that's trying to do it. This story is an odd mix of portal fantasy and suspense. Several worlds are visited and described with enough detail to be interesting on their own. You never know if another attempt will be made on Jacob's life in any of these worlds. The suspects are a couple of artists, several lords, and a wife that apparently doesn't love Jacob anymore. When he figures out who's out to get him, he then has to figure out why. I didn't really like this story all that much. The plot was fed out at a decent pace and it wasn't boring. I think I just expected a little more of a time travel aspect based on the title, not a portal mystery. My personal feeling on this one is a 6 out of 10. Someone looking for an interesting take on portal fantasy might give it a higher rating. The next story is called Above Ancient Seas. This one is a more personal story told from the viewpoint of Tessa. She's a 16-year-old that was away at school when her mom died. Now she's returned home to take care of her family. They're all males ranging from 6 years of age to somewhere in their 40s or 50s. Apparently, they can't take care of themselves, even though they're farmers on this planet named Kula, which was colonized by humans generations before. Tessa shows some interest in her mother's paleontology hobby, and a neighbor starts teaching her some things that will help her out with her new responsibilities. Several themes come through the characters in this one. One is about knowing where your roots are versus knowing where you came from. Their roots are the planet they live on, though humans came from Earth, and some people have a hard time thinking of themselves one way or the other on this planet. Another theme is sacrificing what you want to do for what your family needs you to do. This becomes apparent in the first page or two of the story when Tessa thinks about knowing she'll never return to school again. Another theme is properly honoring the dead and saying goodbye according to tradition instead of becoming a pariah in your community. Those who don't go through with the proper burial in this story, they get their whole family gets shunned and eventually disintegrates. For me, this story was just kind of so-so. It was well written, but I honestly just didn't care much for anyone in it. All the men seemed like cardboard cutouts, though there was one very brief line that made Tessa's father seem really weird. I may have missed something in the subtext of this bit, but I don't think I did. Tessa had a little more depth, but she seemed too resigned to the major change her life took with her mother's death. There wasn't really any action in the story either. There were two brief bits of tension, but not much really happened in the story overall. I'm more into stories that have things happening, and this story was a little too character driven for me. I'd rate this one on the lower end of average with a 5 out of 10. The next story is called Deathbinder, and I found it much more entertaining than the previous story. A guy named Stanley Patterson has been working some late nights because of an upcoming merger that he's dealing with. At the L station, on his way home, he gets attacked and left for dead. Another character named Matt Harmon was a doctor. He had an encounter with a ghost when he was working the emergency room one night. When he started looking into ghosts and talking to his colleagues, he became a bit of a pariah with them and eventually had to retire. Now he's received a call about Stanley Patterson and knows he must help. The point of view jumps back and forth from Stanley Patterson to Matt Harmon to good effect in this story. We get to understand what Stanley is going through and also see why Matt is trying to help. I can't say too much more than that. Stanley has a theme of desire and regret in his actions. Matt has a heavy theme of guilt running through everything he does. We get just enough about Stanley to understand why he feels how he does and why he does what he does. Matt's story is more complex. His guilt has several sources, and one of those is quite scary when considered in the bigger picture of the entire world. There's a reveal near the story's end that I saw coming, but it didn't really change the story's impact for me. I enjoyed this story quite a bit, and I'm rating it an 8 out of 10. Next up in the collection is a wonderful time travel story called The Ring of Memory. Time traveler Hugh Solomon is trying to track down another time traveler named Andrew Tarkin. Solomon wants to take Tarkin back to the authorities since he keeps jumping all over the place in the timeline. Tarkin hates Solomon because Solomon caused the death of a woman named Louisa that Tarkin loved. There's a lot of good stuff in this story. There are many settings like 1902 Chicago, a Viking ship in 1349, Aleppo in 949, an interrogation room in 1930s Russia, and the Basilica at Saint Cor in Montmartre, France. My apologies to any French speakers since I probably just butchered that pronunciation. There's a visit to a super fat oracle that has to be bribed. Why are oracles always fat? Solomon and Tarkin cross paths and see older and younger versions of each other through the story. Some events don't always happen the way the first person describing the event tells the reader. There's even a bootstrap paradox, which is when an event, item, or person causes itself because of time travel. It's not as confusing as it sounds, and here's an example from Back to the Future. Marty McFly plays Johnny B. Good at the Fish Under the Sea dance, and Marvin Berry calls his cousin Chuck Berry, so Chuck Berry hears it. Marty knows the song because Chuck Berry wrote the song in 1958. So Johnny B. Good is actually in a bootstrap paradox because it created itself thanks to Marty's time travel. I typically like time travel stories more than the average story. I thought this story was better than the average time travel story. I liked the main character Solomon. His motivation for pursuing Tarkin was clear. Tarkin's reason for wanting Solomon dead was clear too. But there is a twist near the end that I really liked as well. I gotta rate this one a 10 out of 10. I really liked it. It's easily my favorite story in this book. The next story is called Beneath the Shadow of Her Smile. This one follows a British Army corporal named Toby Beeman. He's serving in the trenches of World War I, but it's not the World War I that you and I know from our timeline. This one has gone on a lot longer, like decades. The story is almost like a day in the life of a World War I soldier. The characters have distinct personalities, and it's easy to tell which one is talking in each scene. Beeman is an old hand at war and has been in it a long time. He's almost got a meh, seen that already attitude about everything that happens around him. I felt a subtle dreariness in this story, but it was more enjoyable because of that. This feeling of dreariness could have been my brain influencing my perceptions with each scene, adding visual details that I've seen in movies and documentaries or read in other stories. I'm not sure, but it made the story more entertaining to me. There's a tale that one of the other soldiers tells Beeman. It seems unimportant at the time, but if you read this story, pay attention to it. Otherwise, you may not understand the story's ending. I think this was probably my second favorite story in the book, and I'm rating it an 8 out of 10. The final story in this collection is called A Deeper Sea. The main character in this one is a Russian named Ilya Stasov. The story starts with Stasov in orbit around Jupiter. There's also a sperm whale and a dolphin in the mix out in space. The story then goes through a long flashback to show how they all ended up there. Stasov is Russian military, yet he's also a scientist doing research on dolphin speech. The research leads to guilty feelings for Stasov and a couple other minor characters. Most let it go, but Stasov is doing what he's doing so he can overcome his own guilt. It also touches the idea that religion can be so powerful that it can be painful. I enjoyed this story. Like many of the stories in this collection, the reader doesn't really know where it's going at any given point, and unpredictability is a good skill for any author to have. Stasov is an interesting character with conflicting issues because he's driven to get the dolphins to speak, but he also feels guilty about how he's doing it. In the Asimov's magazine printing of the story, Jablokov stated that this story was his attempt to come up with a good explanation for a painting he saw once. The painting basically showed a whale in orbit around Jupiter. I would rate this story an 8 out of 10. Jablokov later expanded this story into a 360-page novel. I'm lucky enough to have a copy of it, so I'll be reading it a little later this year once the novella isn't so fresh in my mind. Looking at this collection overall, I really enjoyed most of it. The first 3 stories were really good reads. The 3 middle stories sagged a bit for me though they were still somewhat enjoyable. The final 4 stories really hit a lot of fiction tropes that I enjoyed, and I really liked them. Since they hit me in such a good spot, I read most of those in like a day or two. The average of the story ratings give this book a 7 out of 10, which is already good. However, when I add a little weight for how much I enjoyed the book and the writing and how fast I was wanting to read it, it gets an 8 out of 10 overall. So why did I say it was lucky for me that the Internet Archive had the issues each of these stories first appeared in? It's an irritating thing. I got this book from the thrift store at Patch Army Barracks in Stuttgart, Germany. It looks like it's in phenomenal condition for a book that was published in 1996. Here's the thing about my copy though. Someone decided to rip out pages 49 through 54, 105 and 106, and 257 through 260. I'm not sure if this was an angry boyfriend, girlfriend, or spouse, or if it was someone playing a joke on the next person to get the book. The Internet Archive saved me for those 3 stories. I was able to get a PDF copy of the Asimov issues for each of them and read them in their entirety. If it was someone playing a joke to frustrate the next reader, they failed since I'm the one that got them. I'm not sure why any book lover would do that, so I have to assume it was an angry significant other. I'll list the issues for each story in the description. So that's my review for The Breath of Suspension. The stories are worth the read if you can get a copy or find them online. I'll link Alexander Jablokov's website below where you can find 3 other free stories of his. One is from Asimov Science Fiction magazine, one is from the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and one is from an anthology called Intersections. I'll be reading these when I have a chance and do a follow-up video on rating those stories as well. I do hope someone plans to do more collections of Mr. Jablokov's stories. I think they'd be worth the time and effort to put together, and I'd certainly enjoy reading them if they were as good as this one. If you've read any of Jablokov's work, let me know in the comments and add any other thoughts or suggestions that you have. Until next time, enjoy your reading and bye for now.